we're very much following on from our earlier conversation. Thanks, Tom. Our earlier conversation with the panel, where we looked at sustainability in the industry, what the challenges are, how you respond to different times, and how you build a more cohesive industry as well. And so we've got two disruptors here who want to talk about different aspects of what they do. But Mark, you are known for your work around climate change and response to that, and getting to net zero. But you've admitted now that the disruptor himself is facing his own disruption. What is the big challenge for you from someone who is seen as an industry leader in this area? What is the big obstacle now for you in achieving your ambitions for net zero?
That's a good question. I can't help but comment that I've got a very big head up there, which my children will be very pleased that they've always told me I have.
We're all way too big.
Yeah. But
your head fitted.
So the concept of disruptor, I mean, I think it makes out like we are actively sought out to do things which were disruptive, but we actually were accidentally got into the place of being carbon neutral because we did a large amount of tree planting. There's about 19% of the farms down to trees, and they got us there by a default in terms of carbon neutrality. And then what's actually happened is in a nutshell, we've been doing that for, well, since 96, and they've matured, and so as the trees have matured, in effect what's happened is that they're sequestering less than they did at the beginning. But in terms of where we are now, I'm pretty happy that we've had a crack at that. We thought we got to carbon neutrality. We're still at over 90%.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not, running. The rest of the industry got to 90% in reducing their carbon footprint. We wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. So, but it does highlight that, and there's a quote that a guy called Graham Anderson uses regularly in Victoria, which is, and you would have heard it for the last day and a half here, is there's no silver bullets to this issue. There's silver buckshot. And the trees are an important thing that give us that period of time. So now we're going to focus on other things.
But what's interesting, there's a quote from you where you say sequestration is transitional and not permanent. Is that something you were aware of before, or that's something that you've learned? That you thought you'd found a permanent solution, but of course, maturation proves that it is only transitional. Not only transitional, because it's got you to a really strong position, but it is transitional.
Yeah, no, we're aware. The speed of it's caught us out. And you've got to remember, we were novices in this space. Half of our trees are agroforestry, sawlog, high-value timbers, predominantly spotted gums. And in the scheme, and when you look at this from a technical point of view, if you can take that tree out and then replant, you have about a 40% yield, which is then locked away into carbon, high-value timber. And if you actually keep in your farm plan doing that, and that's the key, is have a farm plan, then what you can actually do is get to a point where you will be lowering your footprint as you go along. But it doesn't fix our issue. I mean, to be profitable, we can't take any more country for trees. We've reached the capacity of what we can do. Even though we'd like double district averages, we're a high input, high output system. We've got our fecundatory levels to really good, as good as we can at this stage, although there's some challenges with genetics going forward that we hope we can embrace, and some of the talks the last couple of days have highlighted those. But there's also the issue in terms of we're fundamentally trying to work on a really difficult problem here. Methane is not an easy situation, easy problem to solve, and we don't have those tools in the toolbox to deal with it. So what the trees have given us is this transitional holding position while and the industry as a whole can get further along. And I think that's a useful thing to have done. And you've got to remember the trees, as I said before, we were accidentally got there. They were planted for shelter, for biodiversity gains. We've gone from 46 bird species to 174 bird species on farm now. You've got all your creeks taken out, we've taken out all the erosion, all the salt areas. So all those co-benefits are quite immense. And so in a whole system, which I think we have to look at as farmers, you look at your whole farm, I think they actually do have a really important role. And probably one of the best ones is shelter. I mean, if there's a whole, looking at improving your lambing percentages, because, it's pretty simple carbon. You grow more lambs from the same maternal unit or more calves from your cow unit, and you get them to market quicker. So
you're reducing your
you're reducing it. So it's about what Tom's going to discuss is you not only do you get the right market, but you're actually getting higher productivity out of that one unit, and your footprint does go down. I mean, a good take home for farmers in the room here is we've looked at this a lot. I wouldn't be saying this as a beef forum, but in general, it's about nearly half the carbon footprint coming out of lamb than there is out of beef going forward. And so from a red meat perspective, we're a long way ahead. Now, you look at the chickens and the porks, we're a long way away from them too, but in terms of where we're going, there's some really good news. So what we are going to do is focus on looking at the things we can control and be aware of the things that hopefully are coming down. The genomics, we're going to keep focusing on being more efficient. Carbon efficiency goes very hand in hand with economic efficiency. If you've got high stocking rates and you've got lambs being turned off quickly and you've got the high survival rates, all of those tick boxes which are good sheep farming, then you will actually have a lower footprint. So there's no conflict with this stuff. It's just we need to focus on trying to understand some of where the gaps are in our knowledge. And again, to go back to Steve Wiedemann's presentation yesterday, and understanding that cost curve of what it will cost to get there.
Yeah, one of the things that you say here again is you say methane is the big baby, the big problem. And you've just outlined there some of the ways of being able to deal with that. If you're growing your product quicker and you're getting it to market quicker, then that's having an impact. But is there still, you've talked about that gap though, don't you? So there is still that gap in being able to deal with it. Sequestration gets you to this point, but that's not going to hold, is it? That's not going to be enough.
It's even more of it. It's all, there's the FOMO, fear of missing out. Well, we got there. There's the other one, which I call ROMO, which is the relief of missing out, which is now, I think is good for us because it reorientates our operation on what we need to be looking at going forward. And those sequestration rates we've got, they're going to just keep going down. Unless we do some amazing things or we take out, we've got half permanent revegetations for biodiversity values and shelter. If we could go and take all that out, which we won't for a variety of reasons, and if you put those into sawlog timbers, you will have higher carbon sequestration rate, and it will give us a bit of a lift for a period of time, but it won't give us any more. So you've got this whole issue about it will continue to decline. Now, it's not accelerating, and Rich Eckhart, I caught up with him on Monday, and he's sort of one of the gurus in this space, and he's the one who's done the studies on our farm twice. And what he's saying is, and he's pushing the Australian government in terms of the inventory now, is to look at 10-year averages for what's going on, because you can have a lot of fluctuations going forward. It's like soil carbon. Soil carbon, you reach a capacity level, which we have at 3.5–4%, in a perennial-based system. It's basically dictated to by rainfall. So what we're doing now is looking at all those quite technical things that we can get involved with, and that is the genetics, it is the feed additives, and it's going to be looking at whether it's going to be water sourced or whether it's going to be, we've got a feedlot so we can put stuff through for finishing in the system at the end. And at the moment we've looked at all of them and they're still too cost. They're too expensive for what the market's dictating. But that could change in time. So that's going to be our focus. And I do feel a sense of relief there because we know what we have to do now. We don't know how we're going to do it, but we do know what we have to focus on.
You just made a point there, and I think this is interesting as well. How is good practice also good business?
Well, I think if you focus on that carbon efficiency, and so that basically means that you have less waste in your system, so that those lambs which are in our feedlot which are not performing, and so you know that they're not performing, you can rid them out there, or you can look at the genetics of them and make sure you breed less of them. So that wastage goes out. There's no empty cows or ewes on our farm because once they scan, they all go. You focus on looking at those genetic drivers which are really important for feed conversion and for growth, and not forgetting the animal welfare traits along the way. You know, we still want to have a sheep that's got good feet and is a robust animal. You know, we farm at scale. We have to watch our labour efficiency, and so we can go forward. So you don't forget those things, but you identify what those traits are and you go hard at them. And that's what we're doing. And I'm 64. We're in a generational shift on the farm, and our kids are, they're aware of this, and so that's sort of part of their challenge going forward, is to understand some of those things, which they're embracing, which is really rewarding and very positive.
So I want to come back and talk a little bit more about this, but I do want to bring Tom in now and talk about where you're at. A lot of the conversation, Tom, today has been around this issue of how you educate the public, change the story of lamb. What's wrong with the story, and what story do you want to tell?
Thanks, Dan. I think the biggest issue we face in lamb on menus is a lack of provenance and retail. Beef have done a great job, and I want to step back just one step. In 1997, I went to the first lamb convention at the Dallas Brooks Memorial Hall in Melbourne. And what did we talk about? We talked about feedback, we talked about the need for value-based marketing, and that was 27 years ago. And here we are, still talking about the need for feedback, provenance, everything else. And it's been quite an amazing and frustrating journey. Interesting enough, since that time in 97, lamb's consumption per capita in Australia has gone from 12 to 7 kilos.
That's a price factor?
There's price, and I think I'll just touch on that in a sec. The other worrying thing for sheep in that time, average farmer age has gone from early 50s to mid 60s. We're not attracting youth into this industry. So when we go back to the real issues, we've got to change our systems. Beef in that same time, in 97, had a few ugly looking skinny cows called Wagyus, have now made it a multi-billion-dollar industry. Since then, Ranges Valley were feeding a few black steers, and now all of a sudden, they're multi-billion-dollar industries. And lamb, we're still a commodity. The issue we see on menus time and time again, I've always said, and any of our clients, we're stuck on the cheap seats on menus. You'll have beef, you'll have Ranges Valley, 120-day fed, you'll have a grass-fed, you'll have a Wagyu, and then stuck in the corner of the menu, you'll have chicken, pork, lamb. Our biggest issue, we're just usually called lamb. It's very hard. So I think we've lost price, but I think we've lost value. Consumers don't see us as being a worthy investment. To do that, I think we've got to encourage, we've got to give reasons, we've got to give provenance. Most lamb in Australia is sold by just the heading lamb. Beef, you've got breeds, you've got regions. There's such a good story we could tell. And we are losing food service. We are losing out.
Part of that story you've said is you ask yourself the question, if the king was coming to dinner, what lamb would you give him? And here's the interesting bit, how would you know that it's exceptional? Well,
100%. You play the Russian roulette of going, the issue now, and even in our kills, we'll see variances between 3 and 14% IMF. In a commodity-based system, they all go in the same boxes. So it is challenging, really, all the research, and there is a general sentiment, lamb is lamb. But MLA spent $10 million doing consumer research, or probably $20 million, and it was really good stuff. Lamb isn't lamb.
Well, Peter talked a bit about this yesterday, but there's a gap, isn't there, between where you're at, what Peter's talking about, the conversation that we heard today, the gap between producers and processors, and where that premium opportunity lies. If this has been such a long story, but one that we're still lagging in, why is that?
My honest view, we've got too many bureaucrats in this industry, not enough entrepreneurs. The biggest advantage, the biggest change in this lamb industry has been entrepreneurs. Roger Fletcher, Chris Thomas. You look at the markets they've opened up in the world. What the lamb needs, we need more entrepreneurs. We don't need people on the sidelines yelling, going, do this, do this. We've actually just got to pick up the ball and start running. And that, everything we've done in lamb was based on, I can't sit here in 20 years' time at LambEx talking about we're going to change. We're going to do it. And I can't tell you how exciting it is. Rob Banks, who's a big mentor of mine in genetics, said every year we need to produce an animal that's never walked the earth before. And really, we see the same in lamb. Every year, we're now trying to produce a lamb that hasn't existed before. We've cracked 14% IMF, 15% IMF. The opportunities for a 14% IMF product into Japan, thin sliced, is huge. So we need information flow So I see there's nothing but opportunity. So please don't take that sentiment as negative. I sit here looking at this world going, if Wagyu can find homes for billions of dollars, I get it's not going to be everyone. I get there's cost of living pressures, but I think we can do better, and I think we can capture more value.
Why isn't it happening? I mean, you're looking at doing it, but most aren't. Is that because people are comfortable doing business the way they know it, or it is too? I mean, it's not easy to do what you're doing in the transition and to put that work in to create something that's never walked the earth before.
But I think you do get appreciation. That processing game is hard. It is a hard business. It is so dynamic. As you talked about this morning, Sam, the world changes quickly. What happens if Trump gets in and puts a 20% tariff in a protectionist move against them? The impacts on that as well. So it is a really difficult industry to play in. I think, in this, and it's no different to Mark going down the path, in the industry you can be leaders or you can be bleeders. And we've decided I'm not going to sit here in 20 years, asking what happens if we did this. But I do think there's a lot of opportunities. You look at the impact of Korea, Korea is our fastest growing market. Lamb, 8% IMF lamb in Japanese or hot pot, I think eats better than Wagyu.
And there, in those markets, is there the literacy, the awareness? Do they understand the differences in this, or how do we tell that story?
We've gone down a very deliberate strategy around breed-based marketing. When you see Wagyu on a menu, it's really easy for someone at the front of house to explain what the difference between Angus, Wagyu, Hereford, whatever it might be.
And sometimes if people can't even explain it, it's something like art. I don't know what it is, but I know when it's good.
Yeah, but there's every market's different. We're now getting all our clients GAP accredited. There's a huge market with animal welfare, unmuled sheep. There's a huge market, some of the carbon neutrality. Every market's different, and you can't go in saying what one size fits all. But I certainly think, I think we're seeing a change. I think what Gunda Guy's done is brilliant, and Will and I often chat over, but I think we'll see a change. And we're quite excited. Genetics, we've now got the genetic technologies. We can produce 10% lambs. It's always a bell curve. You're not going to have every lamb 10%, but, I can see, we've got kills now with 30% of the lambs over 10%. That for the lamb industry, it'll change. And I think we'll go to Japan, we'll go to Korea, with typically low value cuts. There's a lot of talk about racks. Racks are only 5.5% of the carcass. They'll just look after themselves. What do we do with that 33% of forequarter? How can we change that from grilling chops to premium thin sliced Asian?
And that's possible because, again, in the public imagination, you think about a grilling chop, you're not expecting something like a cutlet. So allowing people to have that awareness, again, that's part of the story you're telling, isn't it?
I think so, but really it's an easy story. We're just piggybacking on beef. The story's already been told. Even some of our cup description, we're actually using beef terminology because people understand it. I think certainly beef's paved the way. Phil Ruthen, the MLA 2000 Holbrook Meat Profit Day, said that, we've got to become more like the wine industry. We've got to have provenance. And I think that's where lamb lacks. We don't have provenance. I really welcome the likes of Coles having different products now, not just lamb, having greys, having premium, and I think all the markets need to head that way. We need to have segmentation because we can't have lamb sitting in a retail at $50 a kilo, and I've got big teenage boys. It's bloody expensive to fill them up. You need to be, and I think that's the other thing with lamb. We're in the entertainment business now. And when I say with the entertainment, we've fallen out of the weekly repertoire. We've fallen out of the basket of most people.
And that's something you expect to remain?
Well, I suppose, and I always had the question,
the cost of living pinch, and
if we want to get back in that retail basket, we're going to become cheaper. It doesn't work. We're a high-cost product. We're bracketed with lobster. So we are in the entertainment industry. When someone comes over to entertain family, Marty, previous speaker, talked about the roast. That's the game we're in. But when you entertain, you want people to be proud of what they're serving. You want to know that they're going to nail it, not crack open a 3% lamb cutlet that tastes like rubbish and everyone thinks, you're a shit cook. So, that's, I think, it's really simple stuff. I think the industry will go that way. But there is no doubt I see a huge opportunity. But the only theme I'd say, this industry needs a lot of entrepreneurs. Pick up the ball and run. There's some really good merino lambs. There's some really good sheep coming through. We've got to have a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting in 20 years' time. And I remember the first, I was last year uni, hangover, 30 kilos lighter. I was, I was young and enthusiastic, and interesting enough, just all the young people, that LambEx inspired me to leave uni and apply for a job in lamb processing. So you are an exciting space. It's actually better. Like, I think we look at beef, all of a sudden they've captured that value. They've targeted every one of those high echelon markets. There's all of a sudden you're seeing, and probably the one thing I really saw in China last year, in Shanghai, I went to the biggest trade show in the world, CL. Everyone had good beef. The Russians' Angus beef was insane. The Chinese Wagyu beef was insane. The South American beef was insane. Everyone's lamb was rubbish. So I came away going, I'd rather be in lamb. Like, there is a huge opportunity. Our global competition is not only declining, but what they produce is pretty ordinary. So I did come away very enthused about, we can pack a punch with lamb over the next few years, but we're going to do that two ways. We're going to add value, but we're also going to streamline and lower our cost of production.
And is this mostly an export story, not a domestic market story?
There's
not enough to sustain domestically, I suppose.
It's interesting, and the best marketing comment there's more in common between the upper echelon markets of Sydney, Shanghai, Singapore than there is, as you say, with Yale and down the hill.
Yeah.
They're all the same. We've all got one market. Yeah, they love brands. All of a sudden, I was amazed when we were very passionate and call it ego. We wanted to be the first people in Australia to have the $100 a kilo cutlets. Sales went up. When Mr. Wong's had a $600 Wagyu steak, they couldn't keep up. We've got to become premium. We've got to become, and I think the integration between genetics and markets will become more apparent. I'm looking forward, you'll see more process rather than finishing, and feedback becomes less important. And when I say that, people always get confused. Feedback isn't the best tool. What's really good, if we know lamb ABC, we put on barley lupins for 70 days, we know now roughly on a 32 kilo carcass, that lamb's probably going to average about 6.5, 6.7%. Once you get feedback, it's too late. The lamb's already dead. So that genetic nutrition market integration is what's changed in beef. All the big processors have got processed their own feedlots. They all benchmark their Angus suppliers. They know their genetics. They know their results. And you see that cultural change emerge. I think we're going to see the same in lamb. I think we're going to see bigger carcass weights. And I think we're going to see more process their own feedlots. And with our clients, we're positioning ourselves for that.
I'll bring Mark back in just a minute, but I just want to go to something that Steve Chapman said this morning in our conversation. Be careful what you wish for. What are the risks downstream from that for other producers who are not? So if you're talking about being able to identify where that premium is, incentivise people to produce that, be able to build that into the pricing model, then others are going to suffer who compare unfavourably. So is there an element of a two-tiered sort of industry appearing?
What Steve says is 100% right. The typical, and actually my background was value-based marketing. I worked with Viascan and headed up in Australia and New Zealand. Typically that's, there's always been the problem with value-based marketing. If you pay $1.50 for what, you've got to average your kill for the day. So if you pay $1, if you pay 50 cents to one person, you've got to take 50 cents off the other person. I don't think that's necessarily the case if, as I said, if you understand that genetic and nutrition integration, you don't have that bottom end. Now, there's no doubt, yes, there's only so many upper echelon consumers in the world, but we're so far away from that. We're literally looking at that top-end Angus industry, top-end Wagyu. We're probably talking a $10 billion industry. New Zealand sheep numbers are going down. China, India are eating all their own. I think Australia's got a huge opportunity to attack that. and I think we're going to hit the EU with force. I love some of the stuff Claire put up the other day about EU's, the UK farmers, what's their attitude to Australian lamb, and everyone's going, cheap commodity, and I go, well, let's front up, let's have a go. So anyway, it's exciting. Lamb's got we've got to get our production systems a lot better. I think too many producers are breeding and finishing. We need to get systems where we can have dedicated breeders and dedicated feeders.
I'm getting a blinking up. This goes so fast. I didn't realise we were sitting up here having this conversation. I didn't realise where time's gone. But Mark, just listening to that, where's the convergence in that? One of the things you were saying is that the capacity to grow quicker, get to market quicker, that reduces the impact on your carbon footprint. Does that also correspond to being able to produce a premium product?
It could. I don't think there's the reach. We're involved in a carbon neutral beef job with Coles and with our wool with RX, with ZQ. There's a premium there for some of the wool with the carbon story involved. But in terms of the market ready, I'm not sure if it's there yet, but I do think that one of the key factors that you've got to be aware of, and this is sort of probably to round it all off, I think from a farmer perspective, you've got to treat it like a soil test. You've got to go back and have you need to know what your carbon footprint is on farm, so you need to baseline it, and then you need to work out where you're going to go from there going forward. And I think that will allow you market access if you're in the lower spot. So it might not necessarily be price pointed, but you've got to remember that, 69% of the top 100 economies in the world are companies, and a lot of the ones that we supply product to that have signed up to the Science-Based Target Initiative, which is saying they have to reach these carbon markets. So regardless of what that lamb is, they're going to have to come in to reach those targets, and they'll be looking back down the line as us as producers and what we can do. And my only other advice is you need to look at what we call insetting, not offsetting. So if anyone wants to sell their carbon to other parties, and you heard this yesterday twice, don't do it. Keep it for yourself because you'll need it for your own product. There are absolute sharks out there.
Just a final thought from you fairly quickly, and that is the question of trust. We talked about that this morning, but trusting the science, trusting the numbers the carbon audits provide. Is there confusion around that? Is there an element of mistrust?
So the NFF and the Australian Forestry Producers took me to Sharm for the 2 COPs ago, and I was there and we told our story there. And I went there with some knowledge of the different views about methane and the science there. And Cattle Australia's pushing a particular line at the moment. It hasn't actually got into the sheep industry. And I came away with the view that the science is accepted, and I came away with the view that the international protocols that we've signed up is very clear, and that ship has now left the harbour, and where there's no point spending time on that distracting conversation, because that's what the market's dictating. That's what
that's your reality.
That is the reality. So whatever we think or wish to be is not what's actually happening. So I've just come back and focusing on what we can focus on, which is actually lowering that methane impact on farm of that animal.
And perhaps more sheep than beef.
Well, it's just lower footprint. Though I still like my beef. Yeah.
Okay. On that note, we'll leave it. Mark Wootton and Tom Ball, please thank them. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
No worries. Well done.